You need to step out and explain that vehicle right now.
I already did. I'm part of the memorial program. The vehicle was cleared.
Parking restrictions still apply.
Then talk to event staff. They already handled it. Here, retired credentials.
I don't care who you are.
Officer, you are making a mistake.
General Marcus Hale was a retired three-star general. Officer Tyler Briggs was a rookie patrolman who still thought every situation had to become a test of authority. This rookie patrolman just made the biggest mistake of his life. A retired three-star general was attending a memorial service for a fallen officer and veteran. The setting was solemn. Families were present. Active duty soldiers were in formation. Veterans stood in silence near the wreath line. Then Briggs stepped in, ignored the event protocol, ignored military credentials, and put handcuffs on the general in front of everyone. He thought he was enforcing order. What he was really doing was ending his own career on camera. And yes, it was all recorded. His body cam was running. Several people had phones out. Event staff had cameras too. There was no hiding what happened after that. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories about ego, power, and instant accountability, like this video and subscribe. This happened at a Veterans Memorial Cemetery just outside the city. Police were there for traffic control and access points. Military personnel were there for the ceremony. Families were there to honor the dead. Everybody had a role. That matters. Marcus Hale was not there as a guest in the crowd. He was part of the memorial program. He had been invited to place a wreath for a fallen brigade commander he had once served with. People on the military side knew exactly who he was. The event organizers knew too. His arrival had already been coordinated. Briggs was assigned to vehicle control near the main approach road. It should have been simple work. Keep lanes clear, help late arrivals, stay out of the ceremony, unless something serious happened. He didn't do that. He saw a black sedan parked near a restricted curb close to the ceremony route. That car had been cleared for official event movement. Briggs either didn't know that or decided it didn't matter. He focused on the vehicle and made up his mind before asking a single useful question. By that point, Hale had already stepped away from the sedan and moved into place for the wreath presentation. He was dressed formally, wearing retired insignia and ribbons. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Briggs walked straight toward the ceremony area and interrupted him. He told Hale to step out and explain the vehicle. He spoke like this was a routine enforcement stop. Wrong setting, wrong tone, wrong target. Hale stayed calm. He identified himself. He explained that he was part of the memorial service. He showed his retired military credentials. That should have ended it right there. It didn't. Briggs looked at the credentials and kept going. He said parking restrictions still applied. He said he didn't care who Hale was. Then he shifted from the car to Hale himself and started treating the situation like non-compliance. People nearby noticed fast. A military officer tried to explain that Hale was scheduled to participate in the ceremony. A cemetery staff member moved over and told Briggs the vehicle had already been cleared. A retired officer in the crowd tried to calm things down before the scene got worse. Briggs ignored all of them. That was the real problem. Not confusion, not lack of information. He was being given multiple chances to stop. He refused every one. Hale did not argue. He did not posture. He repeated the same basic facts. He was there for the service. His vehicle had been cleared. The memorial should continue without disruption. Briggs took that as resistance. He ordered Hale away from the wreath line. Hale stepped aside because he wasn't going to turn a memorial into a public fight. Briggs followed him and kept pressing. He demanded identification again, even though he had already been shown credentials. He started talking about interference with police duties. That's when younger officers nearby began to realize something was seriously off. One of them quietly radioed for a supervisor. Smart move. He could see this was going bad. Briggs kept escalating. He warned Hale that if he didn't comply immediately, he would be detained. Think about how absurd that was. A retired three-star general at a memorial service, surrounded by soldiers, veterans, and grieving families. The issue had already been explained. The rookie still pushed forward because he had locked himself into it. Hale remained composed. He told Briggs he was making a mistake. He made no threatening move. He gave no reason for force. He stayed controlled in a way that made Briggs look even worse. Then Briggs reached for the handcuffs. That was the moment the whole thing changed. People stopped seeing it as a tense misunderstanding. They saw exactly what it was. A rookie officer letting ego run the scene in the worst possible place. Briggs pulled the cuffs out and moved in like the decision had already been approved by someone above him. It hadn't. General Hale did not pull away. He did not raise his voice. He did not give Briggs any excuse to claim threat, resistance, or disorderly conduct. He kept his hands visible and stayed still. That detail mattered later because the body cam made it impossible for Briggs to invent a struggle that never happened. Briggs told him he was being detained for interference. That claim was weak on its face. Hale had not blocked him, touched him, threatened him, or disrupted police operations. The real issue was simpler. Briggs had given an order in public. The general had calmly explained why the order made no sense in context, and the rookie could not handle that. So he cuffed him. He put handcuffs on a retired three-star general at a memorial service in front of active-duty soldiers, veterans, police officers, cemetery staff, and grieving families. That single act turned a bad judgment call into a department-wide emergency. People reacted immediately. Several soldiers broke posture and looked toward the scene. One older veteran stepped forward before another attendee stopped him, probably because everybody understood that one more person entering the scene could make Briggs even worse. A woman near the front row pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Another person was already recording from the side walkway. A local reporter who had been covering the memorial lifted a camera toward the disturbance. Briggs had managed to create the exact kind of public humiliation that departments spend months trying to avoid. Hale still stayed controlled. He did not plead. He did not argue for the crowd. He stated the basic facts again. He was there as part of the ceremony. His vehicle had been cleared. The officer was making a serious mistake. He spoke like a man used to command, but without ego. That contrast made Briggs look even more reckless. Briggs responded by tightening his grip and walking Hale farther away from the wreath line. That made it worse. Now the memorial itself was visibly disrupted. Families turned in their seats. Soldiers on ceremonial duty were distracted. Event staff stopped watching the program and started watching the arrest. The entire point of police presence at an event like that is to protect order and dignity. Briggs did the opposite in under 2 minutes. A younger patrol officer near the lane control post got on the radio again, this time less quietly. He requested a supervisor to respond to the ceremony area immediately. His tone told the story. Something had gone very wrong. Briggs either didn't hear it or thought he could still push through. He started defending his decision out loud to the people around him. He treated every correction as interference. He treated every explanation as a challenge to his authority. That's the trap weak officers fall into. They stop enforcing actual rules and start defending their pride. A military captain moved towards the edge of the scene and identified Hale's role in the service. Briggs dismissed him too. A cemetery coordinator tried again to explain the access arrangement for the vehicle. Briggs cut him off. An older retired officer from the city's police department told Briggs he needed to slow down and think. Briggs ignored him as well. At that point, he wasn't managing a situation. He was fighting reality. Hale was then led several yards away from the ceremony path and positioned near a marked patrol unit. Briggs kept talking, kept justifying, kept acting like the problem was everyone else. Refusing to recognize his authority, Hale remained calm and compliant, which stripped Briggs of the usual excuses officers use after the fact. Then another thing hit Briggs, and it clearly hit him too late. 2 junior officers nearby had recognized the name Marcus Hale. One of them knew exactly who he was. Not vaguely, not maybe. He knew. He had seen the event sheet. He had seen the military guest list. He stepped closer, looked at Briggs, then at the handcuffed general, and realized this was now beyond embarrassing. This was a command level bad. He got on the radio and pushed harder for supervision. That call finally brought Sergeant Elena Ruiz. Ruiz had been handling perimeter issues near the main gate when the urgent request came through. She arrived fast, saw the crowd formation before she even reached the center path, and knew this was not normal event noise. Then she saw Hale in cuffs. That changed everything instantly. Ruiz knew who he was. She also knew what this would look like once the footage moved beyond that cemetery. A retired general, invited participant, memorial setting, public handcuffing, multiple witnesses. There was no soft landing left. She walked straight into the scene and demanded an explanation. Briggs started giving one. He said he had encountered non-compliance connected to a restricted vehicle. He said Hale had interfered with a police directive. He tried to frame the arrest as a straightforward enforcement action. Ruiz looked at Hale, looked at the cuffs, looked at the soldiers and families watching, and understood that Briggs had just handed Internal Affairs a gift-wrapped case. She asked one key question first. Had Hale threatened anyone or resisted physically? The answer was no. Everybody knew it. The Bodycam knew it too. Then she asked whether Briggs had been informed that Hale was part of the memorial program and that the vehicle had been event cleared. Again, yes, more than once. That was the break point. Briggs still tried to defend himself. He kept talking about consistency, rules, and not letting status affect enforcement. On paper, that sounds tough. In context, it was nonsense. Nobody had asked him to ignore the law for a powerful person. They had told him he was misreading the situation from the start. Ruiz then turned to Hale, addressed him properly, and told another officer to remove the cuffs. That was the moment Briggs lost control of the scene for good. Every person standing there understood what had just happened. The supervisor had not come in to support the rookie. She had come in, assessed it in seconds, and reversed him in public. And Briggs still didn't fully get it. Instead of shutting up, he started arguing with his own sergeant. He insisted he had lawful grounds. He said backing off would undermine police authority on scene. He was so deep in the mistake by then that he thought doubling down might save him. It did the opposite. Because the second he challenged Ruiz on that scene, in front of witnesses, he changed the problem from bad judgment to insubordination, wrapped inside a public misconduct incident. Hale's cuffs came off. Red marks were visible on his wrists. He rubbed them once, straightened his coat, and did not make a spectacle of it. He did not demand theatrics. He did not turn it into a speech. He just stood there with more discipline than the officer who had arrested him. That image stuck with everyone watching. Ruiz ordered Briggs to step back and say nothing else until command arrived. By then, command had already been notified. Not just police command either. Word had moved to the event liaison, then to department leadership, and almost at the same speed to the nearby military installation. Once names started crossing radios and phones, the scale of the mistake became obvious. This wasn't a messy local complaint that might sit in a file for weeks. This was happening live at a memorial, with a retired three-star general and multiple agencies now aware of it. Briggs had wanted to prove he was in charge. Now he had the command staff, military brass, and soon internal affairs moving toward him, all because he couldn't admit early on that he had misread a parked car. That's how careers end fast, not always from one bad thought, from refusing every chance to stop. Captain Andrew Cole arrived less than 5 minutes later. By then, the ceremony had not fully recovered. The crowd was still watching, and Briggs was standing off to the side with the look of an officer who knew the ground had shifted under him, but still hadn't accepted how bad it was. Cole took in the scene fast. General Hale had been uncuffed. Sergeant Ruiz was controlling the area. 2 junior officers were visibly uncomfortable, and several attendees were still recording. Cole had enough experience to understand what that meant. He did not need a long briefing to know this was already bigger than the cemetery. He went straight to Ruiz first. Smart move. He wanted the clean version before Briggs started trying to rewrite it. Ruiz gave it to him in order. Briggs had approached Hale over a vehicle position near the restricted curb. Hale had identified himself and explained he was a scheduled participant in the memorial. Multiple people, including military personnel and event staff, had confirmed the same thing. Briggs had ignored the explanations, treated the exchange as non-compliance, and handcuffed Hale for interference. No threat, no physical resistance, no public disorder caused by Hale. Just escalation by the officer. That summary was enough. Cole then turned to Briggs and gave him one chance to explain himself. Briggs tried. He said he was enforcing a restricted area. He said he could not allow exceptions based on status. He said Hale had challenged his authority in front of a crowd and refused to follow direction. It was a terrible defense because it exposed the actual problem. He was still talking about authority as if the issue was personal disrespect instead of judgment, protocol, and restraint. Cole cut him off. He asked the question that mattered most. Had Briggs been informed that the vehicle was event cleared and that Hale was part of the memorial program? Briggs admitted that people had said that, yes. That answer killed the rest of his defense right there. Because once he admitted he had been told, more than once, what the actual situation was, this stopped being a misunderstanding. It became a conscious decision to ignore context, ignore corrections, and escalate anyway. Cole's face changed at that point. Not dramatic, just colder. He knew what this meant for the department. He also knew the footage would be brutal. He told Briggs to surrender his Bodycam unit at the end of the scene, remain silent unless directly questioned, and stay separated from the event. Then he told another officer to pull Briggs from active public contact immediately. That happened right there, in front of other officers, and Briggs still made it worse. Instead of staying quiet, he tried one more time to argue. He said backing him down in front of civilians would make the department look weak. He said officers had to stand by enforcement decisions once made. That line finished him. A seasoned supervisor hears that and understands the officer still hasn't learned the lesson. He's not showing regret. He's showing attachment to the ego that caused the problem. Cole shut that down on the spot and told him he was no longer part of the event operation. At the same time, another track was moving fast behind the scene. The chief had already been notified. Not through rumor, through command. The initial call up the chain was urgent because the names involved forced it to be urgent. A retired 3-star general had been handcuffed at a memorial by a rookie officer after being identified and vouched for on scene. There's no version of that report that sits quietly until Monday. The local base commander had also been informed. The military liaison attached to the event made sure of that. By then, police command was not just thinking about discipline. They were thinking about interagency damage, public trust, press response, and whether they had just insulted an entire military community in one of the worst settings possible. General Hales still handled it with more control than anyone had a right to expect. He did not grandstand. He did not demand special treatment. He answered Cole briefly, confirmed the sequence, and made clear that the ceremony should be allowed to continue with as little disruption as possible. That matters, because it stripped away any excuse that emotions had confused the scene. Hale stayed composed. The officer did not. Cole apologized directly to him, publicly, short and clear. He did not try to bury it in vague language. He acknowledged that what happened was unacceptable. That helped a little, not enough to undo it, but enough that everyone watching saw the department was no longer pretending the rookie had a case. Then came the practical problem. The memorial itself had to continue. Event staff moved fast. Soldiers reset formation. The wreath placement was reorganized. Families were guided back to the service. Ruiz and 2 other officers widened the perimeter so Briggs was out of sight. Cole stayed on scene because there was no way he was letting this spiral again. The ceremony resumed, but the damage had already been done. People in attendance were texting. Some were already uploading clips. A local reporter had enough footage to frame the whole incident before lunch. Several active duty members had names, times, and badge numbers written down. The department was not going to get a private version of this story. And then the real internal collapse started. Once Briggs was moved away from the crowd, Cole had him stand by near the vehicles and ask for a direct timeline. Briggs repeated the same logic again: restricted zone, refusal, interference, neutral enforcement. Every word made him look worse, because none of it addressed the central fact. He had been corrected repeatedly and ignored it. Cole asked whether Hale had threatened him, whether Hale had tried to leave, and whether Hale had physically interfered with an officer. All answers were no. Whether military personnel and event staff had explained the situation before the cuffs went on. Yes, there it was. A lot of officers sink themselves because they think if they keep sounding firm, the chain of command will respect the confidence. Real supervisors don't respect that. They hear immaturity, especially when the facts are this bad. Cole then made the call that effectively ended Briggs's day and probably his career. He told dispatch to mark Briggs out of service, pending administrative review, and requested an internal affairs response package be started immediately. Not later. Not after a cooling off period. Immediately. That's rare for a reason. Departments usually buy time. They separate the officer, gather footage, issue a neutral statement, and move slowly. Cole skipped the usual delay because the incident had too many witnesses, too much documentation, too little ambiguity, and too much external pressure already building. He understood the department could not afford to look hesitant. Briggs finally started to understand the scale of it then. Not because of principle, because of consequences. He asked whether this was really necessary. He said nobody had been hurt. He said he was just doing his job. That line landed badly. He'd humiliated a retired general at a memorial and disrupted a service for the dead, and he was still framing it as routine enforcement under stress. Cole told him this was not routine, not defensible, and not staying in-house as a quiet coaching matter. That's the point where rookie confidence usually breaks. Not when civilians object. Not when bystanders record. When command looks them in the face and makes it clear the department will not carry the mistake for them. Briggs had started that morning thinking a restricted curb line was going to be his little test of authority. Now he was standing beside a patrol unit, pulled from duty, watched by his own supervisors, while command staff prepared an emergency review over an arrest that should never have happened. And the day still wasn't over. Because once the ceremony ended, the paperwork started. Then, the footage review. Then, the calls from downtown. Then the questions nobody in his chain could answer for him. That's when a bad scene turns into a short career. By that afternoon, the department had everything it needed. Bodycam footage, radio traffic, event notes, phone video from witnesses. The facts were clear. Briggs had been told who Hale was. He had been told the vehicle was cleared. He had been corrected more than once. He still put cuffs on him. That made the review move fast. The chief was briefed the same day. The city manager was notified. The base commander's office also got involved. This was no longer just a bad moment at a memorial. It was now a public failure with cameras, military leadership, and city leadership all watching. That evening, the department released a statement. They admitted a retired senior military officer had been improperly detained during the service. They called it a failure of judgment and professionalism. Internal affairs started immediately. Briggs gave the same defense again. Restricted vehicle, noncompliance, equal enforcement. It went nowhere. The issue was not Hale's rank. The issue was that Briggs ignored the facts in front of him and kept escalating. The video spread fast. Veterans groups were furious. The local community was furious. Even people who usually defended police had no patience for this one. The setting made it impossible to excuse. He had disrupted a memorial and humiliated a retired general in front of grieving families. Hale kept his response measured. The next morning, he gave a short statement. He said public service requires humility, judgment, and restraint. That line stayed with people because it summed up the whole thing better than any department press release. Less than 24 hours after the memorial, Briggs was fired. The department cited improper detention, failure to follow event protocol, disregard of supervisory correction, and damage to public trust. He turned in his badge, his weapon, and the rest of his equipment. His career ended almost as soon as it started. And that's the real point. This was not one split-second mistake. He had chances to stop. He had chances to listen. He had chances to correct himself. He ignored every one of them. After that, the department ordered retraining for ceremonial assignments, military coordination, and rookie supervision. They had to. A small issue had turned into a public disgrace because one officer cared more about winning than thinking. Hale's final message was simple. Authority means nothing without discipline. That was the lesson. Briggs thought backing down would make him look weak. Instead, refusing to back down cost him his badge, his job, and his future. Let me know what you would have done if you had seen that happen in person. And if you've ever watched someone in uniform let ego take over common sense, put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more.
Step aside.
You have my judicial credential.
Doesn't look right.
Then verify it
Where'd you get this?
from the United States government. I'm Naomi Carter, federal district judge. You can confirm me with Chambers, the clerk's office, or the Marshal Service.
I'm handling it.
No, you're delaying a sitting judge from entering the courthouse.
Not coming.
This security officer thought he controlled the courthouse entrance. Then he decided a black federal judge's credentials had to be fake and turned a routine morning into a career-ending incident. He blocked her from entering her own building, ignored the ID in his hand, and kept pushing even after staff recognized her. The cameras were on. Witnesses were everywhere. And he was about to learn that ego doesn't outrank the federal bench. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about abuse of authority, bodycam evidence, and people getting exposed in real time. Like the video and subscribe. The judge's name was Naomi Carter. She was a sitting federal district judge in her early 50s. Former prosecutor, former appellate lawyer, known for being direct, prepared, and hard to shake. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't need to be. That morning, she arrived just before first calendar. She had a briefcase, a robe bag, and a stack of notes for the hearings waiting upstairs. The lobby was busy. Lawyers were moving through screening. Clerks were coming in fast. Families were waiting near the benches. It was a normal federal courthouse morning. At the checkpoint stood Officer Brett Harlan. Courthouse security, mid-30s, the kind of guy who had gotten too comfortable making snap judgments and calling it procedure. Judge Carter handed him her federal judicial credential. He looked at it, looked at her, then told her to step aside. She identified herself and told him he could verify her with Chambers, the clerk's office, or the deputy marshals. Easy fix. 30 seconds, maybe less. He didn't verify anything. He said the credential didn't look right. Then he asked where she got it. That question changed the whole tone. He wasn't checking a document. He was treating her like a suspect. Judge Carter stayed calm. She told him again who she was and said he was delaying a sitting federal judge from entering the courthouse. She asked him to call the Marshal's Service. He moved in front of the lane and blocked her path. That was the moment this stopped being a mistake. A few people nearby had already noticed. One attorney recognized her immediately. A clerk from inside the lobby looked over and froze. They knew exactly who she was. Harlan kept going anyway. She asked for his supervisor. He said he was handling it. Bad answer. That's what people say when they know someone above them would shut it down. A court employee named Evan Price, her courtroom clerk, stepped towards the checkpoint and identified her by name and title. He told Harlan she was expected upstairs and needed to get through. Harlan told him to stay back, said he wasn't taking anyone's word for it. Now he was ignoring the credential and staff confirmation at the same time. Judge Carter gave him another chance. She told him to contact the deputy marshals and clear it up properly. Instead, he looked at the badge again and said that anybody could wear a suit and carry a fake ID. That line landed hard. It was public, It was recorded, and it told everyone in the lobby what this really was. Not caution, not confusion. Bias mixed with authority. Judge Carter didn't argue with him. She switched gears. She asked for his name, his badge number, and whether his camera was recording. Then she stated clearly and slowly that she had presented valid judicial identification and was being denied entry without verification. She was no longer trying to convince him. She was building the record. Harlan still didn't back off. He reached for his radio. And that made the situation worse, not better. When Harlan called for assistance, he didn't say he was holding a federal judge with valid credentials. He framed it as a problem at the checkpoint. That's how bad officers buy time. They shape the story before anyone else gets there. Judge Carter caught it right away. She asked him what he had just reported. He ignored the question. By then, more people in the lobby were watching. A lawyer near the X-ray belt had stopped pretending to check his phone. A staff member near the elevators had already messaged upstairs. Evan Price stayed close enough to hear, far enough not to give Harlan an excuse to escalate. Judge Carter kept it simple. She said her name again, stated her title, said her hearings were about to begin, said he had refused to verify her identity through normal courthouse channels. Harlan asked for a second photo ID. She told him the judicial credential in his hand was the official ID for courthouse access. He then asked why she wasn't using a private entrance. That exposed another problem. He didn't even know the building routines well enough to fake confidence. Judges use different entry points depending on timing, security flow, and schedule. Staff in the lobby knew that. He clearly didn't. 2 more security officers arrived from inside. Harlan started talking first, fast. He described the credential as suspicious and said the woman at the checkpoint was refusing to cooperate. That version didn't hold up for long. One of the responding officers looked at Judge Carter, then at Evan Price, then back at Harlan. You could see the doubt immediately. The room already knew more than Harlan's report allowed. Judge Carter didn't waste words. She said she had shown official identification, asked for verification, and been blocked anyway. Then she asked Harlan one direct question. Was he claiming the court's own judicial credential was invalid? Or was he refusing to accept it based on his own judgment? He didn't answer directly. He said he was following his instincts. That told the whole story, not policy, not a system check. Instincts. Harlan then told her she would not enter the building until he was satisfied. That was the worst line yet. He had just turned courthouse access into a personal decision, not based on rules, based on him. The people around them heard it too. A few faces changed right there. This wasn't going to stay inside the lobby. Too many witnesses, too many court employees, too much recording. Judge Carter responded the way experienced judges do when someone hands them a clean record of misconduct. She stayed controlled. She asked him to repeat that statement. He refused. So she repeated it herself, out loud, so the camera in the room would catch it. Then she said he was interfering with court operations and delaying a sitting federal judge without lawful cause. That was the first moment Harlan looked uncertain. Not because he suddenly understood the law, because he realized other people were starting to understand what he had done. From the interior corridor, Deputy Marshal Lena Torres came into the lobby. She took one look at Judge Carter and knew exactly what she was seeing. She moved straight to the checkpoint and identified Judge Carter immediately. That should have ended it on the spot. Harlan tried to keep control anyway. He started explaining himself before Torres even asked a question. Another bad sign. Innocent people usually answer. They don't rush to build a defense before the facts are even requested. Torres asked one thing first. Had the judge presented her credential? Yes, that answer boxed him in. Because from there was nowhere to go. He had the ID. He had staff confirmation. He had a clear path to verify it, and he chose not to. Torres told him to step aside. He didn't move right away. And that hesitation in front of a deputy marshal, in front of courthouse staff, in front of witnesses, made everything much worse. Deputy Marshal Lena Torres didn't need a long explanation. She knew Judge Naomi Carter. She worked courthouse security details. She had seen her enter that building many times. Torres asked Harlan if the judge had already shown identification. He said yes. She asked if he had called Chambers, the clerk's office, or the marshal desk to confirm it. He said no, that was enough. Torres told him to move. Harlan started talking over her. He said the credential looked questionable. He said he was being careful. He said he had to trust his instincts. He kept reaching for the same excuse because he didn't have anything else. Torres shut that down fast. She told him this was a federal judge, this was an active courthouse entrance, and he had no basis to keep blocking her after refusing basic verification. Simple, direct, no room left. Judge Carter still didn't make a scene. She stood there, let the facts sit in the air, and watched him try to talk his way out of something the whole lobby had already seen. That was the point where Harlan made the mistake that finished him. Instead of stepping aside immediately, he questioned Torres in front of everyone. He asked how she could be sure. Bad move. Very bad move. Because now he wasn't just challenging Judge Carter. He was challenging a deputy marshal who actually knew the building, knew the credential system, and knew exactly how far he had already crossed the line. Torres answered him the way professionals do when patience is over. She said she was sure because this was Judge Carter, because the credential was valid, and because he had just admitted he never used any of the available ways to confirm it before blocking a sitting federal judge from entering the courthouse. That landed in the lobby like a hammer. At that point, Harlan finally stepped aside. Not because he understood what he'd done, because the room had turned. Too many witnesses, too many staff, too many people who could repeat the same sequence back word for word. His version was dead. Judge Carter didn't rush through the lane. She did something smarter. She paused and asked Torres to confirm on camera that her identification had been valid the entire time. Torres did exactly that. Then Judge Carter asked Evan Price, her clerk, to note the time and delay the calendar until further direction. That detail mattered. This wasn't just personal humiliation anymore. It had disrupted court operations. She then looked at Harlan and gave him one sentence. She said the danger starts when the person guarding the courthouse decides his judgment matters more than the law. That was it. No speech, no shouting, no theatrics, just a clean statement. And it hit harder because she didn't overplay it. Then she went through security and entered the building. The confrontation was over. The real damage was just starting. Within minutes, the story had moved upstairs. Clerks were talking, court staff were talking. Marshals were already pulling checkpoint logs. By the time Judge Carter reached Chambers, the chief deputy had been notified. The camera retention request was already being discussed, and the first written statements were being lined up from staff who saw the whole thing. That's how these cases turn. Fast. Once people realize there's a clean record, they stop treating it like a misunderstanding and start treating it like evidence. Harlan tried to protect himself almost immediately. He began explaining the situation to the other security officers before anyone formally questioned him. Another bad move. He was too eager. He kept repeating that he was following protocol, but the problem was obvious by then. Protocol would have required verification. He skipped that part, more than once. Worse, he had already said too much on camera. He had admitted he relied on instinct. He had admitted he didn't verify. He had admitted he still blocked entry after staff identification. That's not a paperwork issue. That's a judgment issue. And in a federal courthouse, judgment problems become employment problems very quickly. Later that morning, Judge Carter gave a short, factual account to the chief judge and the head of courthouse security. No embellishment, no anger, just the sequence. Credentials shown, identity stated, Verification requested. Staff confirmation ignored. Entry blocked. Martial intervention required. That kind of statement is dangerous for the other side because it's clean. No exaggeration to attack. No emotion to discredit. Just facts backed by witnesses and video. By lunch, orders had gone out to preserve everything. Lobby surveillance, radio traffic, body camera footage, access logs, incident reports, staff statements. Nothing was getting lost. Nothing was getting quietly rewritten. And Harlan had one more problem. His first verbal explanation to supervisors didn't match what witnesses were already saying. He implied the judge had been confrontational. Witnesses said she was calm. He implied the credentials seemed fake. The marshal said it was standard and immediately recognizable. He implied he was waiting on confirmation. The radio and lobby account showed he never actually requested the right confirmation in the first place. That's when the internal review stopped looking like routine discipline and started looking like a serious misconduct case. Because once the facts are fixed, the motive gets ugly fast. By the end of that day, Brett Harlan was off the entrance post. Not quietly either. Supervisors had already reviewed enough to know this was bigger than a bad interaction. Too many witnesses, too many staff statements, too much camera coverage, and his own words had done a lot of the damage for them. The body camera review was brutal. It showed Judge Naomi Carter presenting valid credentials right away. It showed her giving him normal ways to verify her identity. It showed him ignoring those options. It showed court staff recognizing her. It showed Deputy Marshal Lena Torres confirming her identity immediately. And worst of all for him, it showed that he kept blocking entry after all of that. That killed the confusion defense. Then they pulled the radio traffic. That made it worse. He had called for support without accurately describing the situation. He left out the judge's title, left out the credential, left out the staff confirmation. He framed it like a checkpoint problem instead of telling the truth. That told investigators he wasn't trying to solve the situation. He was trying to control it. Once the footage and radio logs were matched with witness statements, internal affairs moved fast. Harlan was placed on administrative leave first. Then his access to courthouse security systems was suspended. Then came the formal investigation. The question was no longer whether he made a mistake. The question was why he kept going after it was obvious he was wrong. That question got ugly for him fast. Several employees described the same pattern. He was respectful with some people, aggressive with others. More than one person said he had a habit of acting like certain professionals needed to prove they belonged in the building. The review widened. Old complaints came up. Not major headline cases, smaller ones. Dismissive conduct, selective screening, talking down to black attorneys and staff. Things that had been shrugged off before because nobody had forced the institution to look at them side by side. Now they were looking. Judge Carter did not turn it into a media show. She handled it the way judges handle serious misconduct, through record, process, and consequence. She filed a formal complaint through the court's administrative channel. She requested preservation of all footage. She documented the delay to court operations. And she made it clear that this was not about hurt feelings. It was about a courthouse officer deciding he could override law, policy, and official credentials based on his personal judgment. That framing mattered. Because once the issue became institutional, the court had to respond like an institution. The chief judge ordered a review of entry screening practices. The Marshal Service reviewed checkpoint procedures. Security leadership had to explain why a sitting judge could be blocked from entering after presenting valid identification and after being recognized by staff. Nobody had a good answer because there wasn't one. Then the civil side started moving. Attorneys representing Judge Carter sent notice of potential legal claims tied to unlawful detention, public humiliation, interference with official duties, and discriminatory treatment. The courthouse didn't wait for that to explode into a larger public fight. Settlement talks started early, quietly at first, then more seriously once the video had been fully assessed. At the same time, local legal circles already knew the story. Then local media got it. Then it spread wider. The basic facts were too clear to bury. Black federal judge blocked from her own courthouse. Valid credentials dismissed. Deputy marshal forced to intervene. Video preserved. Internal investigation opened. That kind of headline writes itself. Harlan's written report didn't help him. It hurt him. He described the judge as evasive. The footage showed she was clear. He suggested he was waiting on verification. The record showed he refused to use the obvious verification channels. He implied she escalated the scene. The witnesses said he did. Once that report was compared against the video, his credibility collapsed. And once credibility goes, careers usually go with it. A few weeks later, the outcome became official. He was terminated. The stated reasons were straightforward: failure to follow verification procedures, misuse of authority, false and misleading reporting, conduct inconsistent with courthouse security standards. The ugly part sat underneath all of it, even if the paperwork used cleaner language. He had looked at a black woman with federal judicial credentials and decided she didn't fit the role in his head. Then he used his post to act on that assumption. Judge Carter kept working. That's another part people miss in stories like this. The target still has to go back to the same building, same halls, same courtroom, same staff asking whether she's okay. Same place where she was publicly disrespected before work even started. She kept showing up anyway. But the building changed after that. Credential verification rules were tightened. Officers were required to use direct confirmation channels before blocking credentialed court personnel. Bias training was expanded. Escalation policies were rewritten. Supervisors were required to review checkpoint incidents involving court officials the same day. And staff understood something clearly now. The cameras were not just there for defendants and the public. They were there for the people with badges too. That's the part that mattered most. This wasn't a story about one awkward morning at security. It was a story about what happens when a person with a little authority thinks instinct is more important than law. That mindset doesn't just insult people. It disrupts institutions. It damages trust. It turns routine contact into abuse. Harlan thought he was the final word at the entrance. He wasn't. The record was. The witnesses were. The footage was. And once all of that came together, his badge couldn't protect him from the truth he had already put on camera himself. So that's the story. A courthouse officer tried to decide who looked like a federal judge, and that decision ended his career. What would have gone through your mind if you were standing in that lobby watching it happen? Have you ever seen somebody with a little authority push too far because they thought nobody would check them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
What are you doing around these cars?
Walking to mine.
Whose car?
Mine.
ID.
I'm a deputy U.S. Marshal. My credentials are in the inside pocket of this jacket.
Anybody can say they're federal.
That's why you check it.
Step away from the vehicle.
All right.
Turn around.
On what basis?
Suspicious activity. Walking to my own car.
Imagine the shock when a deputy throws handcuffs on a man who says he's a U.S. Marshal and then refuses to check the credentials that could confirm it in seconds. That's how this mess started. Outside a crowded restaurant in full view of bystanders, a routine contact turned into an illegal detention because one deputy decided his own ego mattered more than protocol. This wasn't confusion. It was defiance, and it put him on a direct path to federal trouble. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about abuse of power getting exposed on camera, hit like and subscribe. A lot of these cases only get taken seriously once the footage starts moving. The man in cuffs was U.S. Marshal Jordan Hayes, 42 years old, plainclothes, experienced, and still on duty. He'd spent most of that day handling court coordination and movement updates tied to an active federal case. Nothing flashy, just work. Real work. The kind that doesn't come with a marked unit or a big introduction for local deputies who think everyone needs to explain themselves to them. The deputy who stopped him was Trent Calloway, county sheriff's office, 6 years on the job, too comfortable pushing people around in public. He had the kind of energy that tells you everything early. Loud voice, fast hands, constant need to control the pace. Deputies like that usually call it command presence. A lot of the time, it's just insecurity with a badge. That afternoon, Hayes had parked near a chain restaurant a few minutes from the courthouse corridor. He'd gone inside for a short meetup with a task force contact. Quick conversation, case timing. Next day, logistics. Then he walked back out towards his vehicle with his phone, a file folder, and a jacket draped over one arm. Calloway was already in the lot. Later, he would say he was watching for suspicious behavior because of recent vehicle break-ins nearby. That excuse didn't hold up well. Hayes wasn't checking door handles. He wasn't circling cars. He walked straight to a vehicle he had parked himself. But Calloway had already decided to make contact, and once that type of officer commits to a bad read, the facts stop mattering much. He pulled his patrol SUV across part of the lane behind Hayes's vehicle and got out fast. No normal opening, no calm question. He told Hayes to stop, keep his hands visible, and explain what he was doing there. Hayes didn't match the energy. He slowed down, kept his hands open, and reported that he was a federal officer. He also explained that his credentials were in his jacket. That should have ended the tension right there. A deputy with sense checks the credentials, runs the name if needed, and moves on. Calloway didn't do that. He told Hayes not to reach for anything and demanded ID immediately. Hayes stayed calm and explained where the credentials were. Inside pocket of the jacket. Easy to retrieve. Easy to verify. Calloway ignored the solution and started asking the kind of questions that gave the whole stop away. He wanted to know why Hayes was in that area, whether the vehicle was really his, what business he had there. Not officer safety questions, not traffic questions, belonging questions. People nearby noticed. A delivery driver near the entrance took out his phone. A woman waiting outside started recording too. They weren't reacting to danger. They were reacting to a deputy talking to a calm man, like he'd already decided he was lying. Hayes kept it professional. He gave his full name. He stated his agency. He explained again where the credentials were. He even said dispatch could verify him. Calloway treated all of that like resistance. He ordered Hayes away from the vehicle and moved in for a pat-down. Hayes complied. No sudden moves, no argument, just controlled answers and visible hands. He repeated that he was a deputy U.S. Marshal. Calloway answered that anybody could say that. That line mattered. It showed he heard the identification and chose not to check it. Then he got on the radio and made it worse. He told dispatch he had a suspicious male who was claiming to be federal law enforcement and refusing proper identification. That was the first real point of no return. He wasn't just escalating in person anymore. He was building a false record while witnesses filmed the whole thing. Hayes asked what basis there was for detention. Fair question. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't posturing. He wanted an answer. Calloway didn't give one. He told him to put his hands behind his back. Hayes had a choice. Push back and risk the scene turning uglier, or comply and let the cameras do their job later. He complied. Calloway cuffed him right there in the parking lot. That image changed the whole scene. A plainclothes federal officer in handcuffs beside his own vehicle, while strangers stood a few yards away recording. Nobody looking at it thought they were watching good police work. And Calloway still kept going. He started pressing Hayes with more questions. Why plainclothes? Why the folder? Why no marked unit? Why he was near the restaurant? The questions weren't getting him anywhere. They just showed he had a fixed picture in his head of what authority was supposed to look like, and Hayes didn't fit it. A second unit pulled in a minute later. The backup deputy was Maya Bennett, older, steadier, and a lot less impressed with public theatrics. She stepped out, looked at Hayes in cuffs, looked at the witnesses with phones out, then looked at Calloway. Her first question was the right one. Had the credentials been checked yet? Calloway said no and tried to frame Hayes as evasive. Bennett looked at Hayes and asked for his name. He gave it. Same name, same agency, same calm tone, same explanation about where the credentials were. That's where the balance started to shift. Bennett didn't say much right away, but she didn't need to. She could already see the stop was off, and Calloway knew it. Bennett didn't need long to see the stop was wrong. She asked Calloway what the original reason for contact was. He said Hayes had been acting suspicious around parked cars. Weak answer. The parking lot had cameras. The restaurant had customers going in and out. Hayes had walked straight to one vehicle and never touched another one. Bennett could see that problem immediately. Then she asked the next obvious question. If the man was claiming to be a U.S. Marshal, why hadn't anybody checked the credentials he kept describing? Calloway answered like a man trying to protect a bad decision. He said Hayes was not being straightforward, and that he wanted to secure him first. That sounded better in his head than it did in the lot. Hayes was already cuffed, calm, still giving the same identifying information. The only thing not happening was verification. Bennett moved toward the vehicle. Calloway stopped her and said he'd handle it. That was the moment he made the mistake that killed whatever chance he had left. He walked to the driver's side, opened the door, leaned in and grabbed the jacket from the seat. Then he checked the inside pocket. Exactly where Hayes had said. He pulled out a leather credential wallet and opened it. Federal badge, identification card, name, Jordan Hayes, agency, United States Marshals Service. That should have ended it on the spot. Cuffs off. Clear the scene. Call a supervisor. Start explaining. Calloway still didn't let go. He stood there staring at the credentials, then looked back at Hayes like he was still trying to force the facts to change. He asked why Hayes hadn't just shown them earlier. Bad question. Everybody there already knew the answer. Hayes had been saying where they were from the start. Calloway was the one who blocked it. Bennett stepped in closer and took a look at the credentials herself. She didn't play along. She asked dispatch to verify the badge number. That changed the atmosphere right away. Now, it wasn't just a loud deputy controlling a parking lot. Now there was a record moving through official channels. Dispatch repeated the badge number back, then the name, then the agency, active, valid, confirmed, and that should still have been the end. Calloway found one more way to make it worse. He didn't remove the handcuffs. Instead, he started talking like the federal credentials created a bigger problem, not a smaller one. He shifted to the presence of a service weapon in the vehicle and tried to act like that justified everything. It didn't. A U.S. Marshal carrying a duty weapon wasn't suspicious. It was normal. He was reaching now. Everybody could see it. Hayes stayed controlled, but by then the scene had changed for him too. This was no longer some deputy being rough on the edge of procedure. Calloway had the credentials in hand, had dispatch confirmation, and still kept him restrained in public. That's not confusion. That's a deputy refusing to surrender control after the facts are already in. The witnesses picked up on it too. The delivery driver said out loud that the deputy had just confirmed the man was federal and still had him cuffed. The woman by the curb kept filming and moved closer. A couple leaving the restaurant stopped near the entrance and started watching. Nobody had to guess anymore. The central question was simple. Why was this still happening? Bennett asked Calloway, directly this time, whether he was taking the cuffs off. He didn't answer right away. That silence said enough. Then he started talking about officer safety and scene security, the usual language officers use when they've run out of lawful ground but still want to sound official. It wasn't convincing. Hayes was standing still. The credentials were real. The agency was verified. The only unstable thing in that parking lot was Calloway. Bennett called for a field supervisor. That radio traffic mattered. It meant another deputy on scene had stopped treating this like Calloway's stop and started treating it like a problem. Hayes then did something smart. He reported clearly and in front of everyone that he was requesting a supervisor and that his detention continued after confirmation of his federal identity. He was documenting with his voice, not for drama, for the record, because once a case like this gets reviewed, the timeline matters. Calloway heard that and finally seemed to realize how bad it looked. He took a step back, checked the lot, saw the phone still up, then looked at Bennett like he wanted support he wasn't getting. She didn't help him. She stayed where she was and kept the scene calm. A sergeant arrived within minutes. His name was Darren Pike, and unlike Calloway, he didn't walk into the scene trying to dominate it. He read it first. One man in cuffs. One backup deputy standing off to the side instead of backing the arrest. Several civilians recording. Primary deputy visibly tense. That kind of scene tells its own story. Pike asked for a summary. Calloway gave him one. Fast, defensive, and weak. Suspicious activity. Claim of being federal. Safety concern. Investigation ongoing. Then Pike asked Bennett. That was bad for Calloway because Bennett didn't cover for him. She kept it short. Hayes identified himself immediately. He described the location of his credentials accurately. Dispatch had already verified him. He was still in cuffs. Pike looked at Hayes after that. Hayes gave his name, agency, and the sequence cleanly. No speeches, no ranting. He explained that he had identified himself at first contact, reported the location of credentials, complied with commands, and remained detained after both physical and dispatch verification. That version matched the evidence already sitting in multiple phones and at least one body cam. Pike turned back to Calloway and asked the only question that mattered now. On what basis was Hayes still restrained? Calloway had nothing good left. He started with safety again, then suspicion, then the weapon in the vehicle. None of it held together. Pike told him to remove the cuffs. Calloway hesitated. That hesitation might have lasted only a second or two, but it was enough. Enough for Bennett to see it. Enough for the witnesses to catch it. Enough for Pike to realize this deputy wasn't just sloppy. He was refusing to come down, even under supervision. Pike repeated the order. This time, Calloway unlocked the cuffs. Hayes brought his hands forward and rubbed his wrists once. He didn't make a scene. Didn't need to. The damage was already done, and everybody in that lot knew it. Pike handed the credentials back to Hayes and started trying to lower the temperature. Too late for that. The scene was already beyond local cleanup. Hayes informed him that his office would be notified immediately and that all identifying information for the deputies on scene would be documented. Again, not drama. Procedure. Calloway stood off to the side now, quiet for the first time since the stop started. That was the first smart thing he'd done all afternoon, and even then it was too late. Because while he was trying to recover, the federal side was already starting to move. Hayes had missed a scheduled case check-in during the detention window. That by itself was enough to trigger a call from his office. One of the witness videos was already being texted around locally. The badge number had been confirmed over dispatch. A county deputy had handcuffed a verified U.S. Marshal in public and kept him detained after confirmation. That kind of mess travels fast, and once federal supervisors got the basic outline, Calloway's problem stopped being a county complaint. It became a federal one. The federal office moved quickly once Hayes missed his scheduled check-in. That wasn't something people brushed off. He was active on assignment and then suddenly unavailable during a detention that had already been partly verified through county dispatch. Once that information reached his office, supervisors started moving. About 12 minutes after the cuffs came off, 2 federal vehicles pulled into the lot. The supervisors got out and went straight to Hayes. The first was Supervisory Deputy U.S. Marshal Vanessa Cole. With her was Inspector Ryan Sutter, who handled internal coordination on incidents involving federal personnel. They checked Hayes first, not the deputies. That told everyone there exactly where the priority was. Hayes gave them the timeline in order. Initial contact, immediate identification, location of credentials, handcuffs, dispatch verification, continued detention after confirmation. Cole listened, then asked one question that mattered more than anything else. Was he still in cuffs after his identity had been confirmed? Hayes said yes. After that, Cole turned to Sergeant Pike and asked who had initiated the stop. Pike indicated Trent Calloway. Calloway tried to explain before anyone asked him to. He said he had seen suspicious behavior near parked vehicles, that Hayes had claimed to be federal, and that he had detained him while sorting things out. It was weak. Worse, it was already contradicted by what Hayes had said, what Bennett had seen, and what the witnesses had recorded. Cole asked for specifics. What suspicious behavior? What crime? What justified continued detention after the credentials were found, and dispatch confirmed them? Calloway didn't have clean answers. He bounced between suspicion, safety, and the presence of a firearm in the vehicle. None of it helped him. A U.S. Marshal carrying a duty weapon was not suspicious. It was normal. Then Cole asked whether Hayes had ever refused to identify himself. Calloway said he hadn't provided proper identification at first. Hayes corrected that immediately. He said he identified himself on first contact, gave his full name, stated his agency, and explained where the credentials were. Maya Bennett confirmed that. She didn't hedge. She didn't soften it for Calloway. She just confirmed it. That changed the scene. Now, Calloway wasn't just dealing with a federal supervisor and the man he detained. His own backup deputy was confirming that Hayes had been consistent from the start. Cole then asked Pike whether Calloway was being removed from active control of the scene pending review. Pike paused for a second and then told Calloway to step back and surrender scene control. Another deputy was told to stand with him. He wasn't under arrest right there, but he was done running anything. That hit him hard. A few minutes earlier, he had been acting like the whole parking lot moved on his command. Now he was off to the side, while other people handled the consequences of his stop. He tried to push back, said he had been doing his job, said people were second-guessing him after the fact. That didn't work either. The problem wasn't hindsight. The problem was that Hayes gave him the answer at the start and Calloway ignored it. Cole asked Hayes whether he wanted medical documentation for the cuffs and whether he intended to file formal federal notice of unlawful detention. Hayes said yes to both. That made the next steps unavoidable. Once medical documentation was requested, the wrist restraints became part of the record. Once Hayes confirmed formal notice, this stopped being something the county could smooth over with a vague statement and an internal memo. Then the witness evidence got folded in. The delivery driver who had started recording earlier approached and said he had video covering most of the detention, including the point when the credentials were found. The woman near the curb had footage from earlier in the stop. Sutter took both of their details immediately. He also requested that Pike preserve all bodycam, dashcam, radio traffic, and dispatch logs tied to the stop. Pike agreed. He didn't have much choice. At that point, Calloway made one more mistake. He muttered that none of this would have happened if Hayes had just complied from the start. Cole heard him. So did Pike. So did Bennett. And that line exposed the whole problem. He still thought this was about obedience. Not law, not procedure. Obedience. Cole shut that down right there. She told him Hayes had complied. The issue was that Calloway ignored federal identification, continued the detention after verification, and kept changing the basis for the stop when each excuse failed. That was the end of the argument. Hayes gave his final on-scene account, documented the deputy names and badge numbers, and prepared to leave with Cole and Sutter. Before he did, he looked at Pike and said a badge did not give anyone permission to ignore the law. That line followed the case later for a reason. It was simple and completely accurate. Hayes left with the federal supervisors. Calloway stayed in the lot with his own chain of command. His body camera unit was collected. He was ordered to provide an immediate written summary. Pike also wanted a separate explanation for one specific issue: why Hayes remained in cuffs after dispatch confirmed who he was. There was no good answer to that question. Everybody there knew it. By that night, the stop was already public. The first clip spreading online showed the worst part for Calloway. He had Hayes' federal credentials in hand. Dispatch had already confirmed them, and Hayes was still in cuffs. That was enough to sink any claim that this was just a fast-moving mistake. By morning, local reporters had witnessed video. The restaurant had been asked to preserve exterior camera footage, and the sheriff's office had a problem it couldn't contain with a vague statement. They tried anyway. They said they were aware of the incident and had opened an internal review. That didn't calm anything down. The video was too clear. Hayes looked controlled from start to finish. Calloway looked like a deputy who kept rejecting facts because he didn't want to lose the stop. The federal side moved first. Hayes gave a full statement that same evening. Medical staff photographed the marks on his wrists. Cole and Sutter locked down the initial evidence list: county body cam, dash cam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, witness videos, restaurant surveillance, and every written report tied to the stop. Then they compared the reports to the footage. That comparison buried Calloway. His first written version leaned on suspicious behavior near vehicles. The footage showed Hayes walking straight to one vehicle and not touching another. He also suggested Hayes had been evasive about identification. That fell apart too. Hayes had identified himself right away and kept repeating the same information. Then there was the biggest problem: the continued detention after confirmation. Calloway had no clean explanation for that, because there wasn't one. The sheriff's office put him on administrative leave within 48 hours. That still wasn't the end of it. Once command staff pulled his history, the pattern got harder to ignore. Prior complaints, traffic stops that escalated too fast, repeated accusations that he got aggressive the moment someone questioned him. None of that had stopped him before. Now it all came back at once, because that's how these cases go. Departments ignore the warning signs for years, then act surprised when one deputy finally blows up on camera. Bennett's statement made things worse for him, too. She confirmed Hayes had been consistent from the start, and that verification had been available early. Pike's report didn't help either. He documented that Calloway had no solid reason for keeping Hayes restrained after dispatch confirmation. That pushed the case beyond internal discipline. The U.S. Marshal's Service filed a formal complaint. The U.S. Attorney's Office was notified. A civil rights review started looking at whether the detention crossed into a federal violation under color of law. At the same time, Hayes hired counsel and prepared a civil claim against the county and Calloway personally. That was a pressure from every direction. The county tried damage control. They talked about retraining, review procedures, better coordination with federal agencies, standard language. Too late. The real problem wasn't lack of policy on paper. The problem was one deputy thinking he could ignore the facts in front of him and force the situation his way. Calloway was fired 3 months later. The termination letter cited unlawful detention, false or misleading reporting, failure to follow verification procedure, and conduct damaging to the department. The state certification board opened its own review after that. Losing the job was bad. Losing the license was worse. Once that process started, he wasn't just out of one department. He was looking at the end of law enforcement as a career. Then came the civil side. Hayes's claim was strong for one reason above all others. The facts were simple. He identified himself. He explained where the credentials were. They were found exactly where he said. Dispatch confirmed him. The detention still continued. Juries understand that kind of timeline fast. The county settled before trial. They paid Hayes, agreed to outside review of detention and identity verification procedures, and adopted a rule requiring field supervisors to respond immediately when a local officer detains a verified federal law enforcement officer or disputes on-scene credentials. They also expanded body cam preservation rules in cases involving civil rights complaints. Hayes went back to work. That part matters. He didn't turn into a celebrity. He didn't start doing interviews every week. He went back to the job, but the case followed him in one useful way. Inside federal circles, it became a training example. Local ego, bad stop, ignored credentials, public detention, confirmed identity, no off-ramp. Exactly the kind of failure that can wreck a department and expose it to federal review. Calloway's name followed the case too, for the opposite reason. He became the example of what happens when an officer treats authority like personal control instead of legal responsibility. And that's the point of this whole story. Jordan Hayes stayed calm, stayed precise, and let the facts hold. That's what saved him. Calloway kept pushing after the truth was already in his hands. That's what finished him. A badge gives authority. It doesn't cancel the law. Let me know what you would have done in Hayes' position. And if you've ever seen an officer double down instead of admit a mistake, drop that in the comments too. Share the story with somebody who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more stories like this.
We got a noise complaint. I need you to cooperate before this gets worse.
You got the wrong house. There's no music here, no gathering, no party. You need to verify the address.
You don't get to tell me what I'm hearing.
You came to the wrong address and started threatening citation.
I didn't say arrest
you
yet.
Suggested it.
A late-night noise complaint in Springfield, Ohio, led Officer Derek Vaughn to the wrong address after dispatch confused two nearly identical street names. By the time he arrived, the initial error had already occurred. What followed depended entirely on how he handled that mistake. The house he approached did not match the complaint. There were no signs of a gathering, no music, no movement suggesting any disturbance. It was a quiet residential property late at night. Under normal practice, that would prompt verification. Officers are expected to confirm details when a scene does not align with the report that brought them there. Vaughn did not do that. Calvin Mercer answered the door. From his position, there was no context for the officer's presence beyond what Vaughn provided. Vaughn stated he was responding to a noise complaint and quickly moved beyond inquiry. He introduced the possibility of a citation, then escalated to mentioning arrest and suggested he could take further action if Mercer did not cooperate. The approach assumed a violation without confirming one. Mercer responded with controlled, factual statements. He said there had been no music, no gathering, and no reason for a complaint. He also told Vaughn directly that he had the wrong address. He repeated that point without raising his voice or changing tone. His responses stayed consistent. The location did not match the complaint. The officer needed to verify the call. At that stage, the encounter should have narrowed. The absence of any supporting facts at the scene created a clear signal to reassess. Instead, Vaughn treated Mercer's corrections as resistance. He maintained the same direction, continued referencing enforcement actions, and did not pause to confirm the most basic detail, whether he was at the correct location. The interaction became defined by that gap. One side remained anchored to observable facts. The other continued operating on the assumption that the original complaint applied, even though nothing in front of him supported it. Mercer did not shift into confrontation. He did not attempt to argue beyond the facts already established. He repeated the same information in a steady manner. That limited the officer's ability to justify further escalation based on behavior. There was no disorder, no refusal to communicate, and no action that could reasonably be interpreted as obstructive. During the exchange, Mercer noticed that Vaughn's body camera was not activated. That detail had procedural significance. Departmental policies generally require activation during interactions of this type, particularly when enforcement is being discussed. Mercer pointed out that the camera was off. Vaughn's demeanor changed after that point. The certainty that had driven the initial approach diminished. The references to citation and arrest stopped progressing. He did not issue any citation, did not attempt to detain Mercer, and did not enter the home. The encounter ended without further action, and Vaughn left the property. From a surface view, the situation could have ended there. No arrest occurred. No citation was issued. The officer departed. In many cases, that outcome leads to no further review because there is no immediate record beyond the participant's recollection. Mercer did not allow that to happen. He documented the encounter the same night. He recorded the sequence while it was still clear. The stated reason for the visit, the absence of any supporting conditions at the house, the repeated correction about the address, the threats of enforcement, the body camera issue, and the shift in Vaughn's tone once those issues were identified. The documentation remained limited to what occurred. It did not rely on interpretation. Mercer then filed a formal complaint through official channels. That step converted the encounter into a record subject to review. Once the complaint entered the system, the department was required to evaluate it against available evidence. Investigators began with dispatch records. They confirmed that a noise complaint had been made, but it was tied to a different address. The street names involved were similar enough to create confusion, and the call had been misdirected. Vaughn had been sent to the wrong location. That explained his presence, but it did not explain his actions after arrival. The next stage of the review focused on what Vaughn encountered at the scene. Investigators compared the complaint details to the observed conditions at Mercer's home. There was no indication of noise, no gathering, and no visible activity consistent with the report. The mismatch was clear. Under those conditions, standard procedure would require verification and, if necessary, correction of the address before any escalation. Vaughn did not follow that path. Instead, he continued the encounter as if the complaint applied, despite the absence of corroborating facts. Investigators examined that decision point closely. Officers are routinely dispatched with incomplete or incorrect information. The key measure is how they respond when those discrepancies become apparent. In this case, the response did not align with expected practice. Mercer's complaint provided a detailed account of the interaction. Because it described the sequence rather than offering conclusions, it allowed investigators to align his account with dispatch data and policy requirements. The description of repeated warnings about the wrong address, combined with the absence of any supporting evidence at the scene, established a consistent pattern within the interaction. The body camera issue became a separate focus. Vaughn's camera was not activated during the critical portion of the encounter. Investigators reviewed department policy regarding activation requirements and the timing of recordings. They evaluated whether the camera should have been on from the moment of contact, and whether Vaughn's failure to activate it constituted a violation. The lack of footage removed an objective record of the exchange and increased reliance on other forms of evidence. Explanations for the camera issue were considered, but regardless of intent, the absence of recording during a late-night residential contact involving potential enforcement raised concerns. Body camera policies are designed to protect both the public and the officer. When those policies are not followed, the credibility of the encounter is affected. Investigators then expanded their review to Vaughn's prior record. They identified earlier complaints involving similar conduct. These included reports of aggressive tone, rapid escalation, and a tendency to interpret routine questioning as non-compliance. Each prior complaint had been handled individually, but when viewed together, they suggested a pattern. That pattern changed the context of Mercer's complaint. The incident was no longer assessed in isolation. It became part of a broader evaluation of Vaughn's conduct over time. Supervisors reviewed whether previous complaints had been addressed adequately and whether earlier interventions, if any, had been sufficient to correct the behavior. The accumulation of these factors increased the seriousness of the case. The wrong address response established the initial error. The failure to verify the complaint at the scene demonstrated a breakdown in judgment. The escalation without supporting facts raised questions about adherence to policy. The body camera violation affected the integrity of the encounter. The prior complaints indicated that similar issues had arisen before. As the internal review progressed, the case moved beyond administrative considerations. The confirmed facts created exposure for the county in a civil context. When an officer confronts a resident at the wrong address, escalates without cause, and violates recording policy, the risk extends beyond disciplinary action. Mercer's documentation and formal complaint ensured that the event remained within official channels. This prevented the encounter from being reduced to an unverified dispute. The alignment between dispatch records, policy requirements, and Mercer's account provided a consistent evidentiary base. The county evaluated its position based on those factors. The misidentified address was documented. The absence of any disturbance at Mercer's home was confirmed. The escalation lacked a clear legal basis. The body camera issue weakened the officer's defense. Vaughn's prior complaint history made it more difficult to characterize the incident as an isolated mistake. The civil case concluded with a settlement of $300,000 in Mercer's favor. That outcome reflected the assessed liability and the strength of the documented record. Settlements in such cases are typically based on the likelihood of prevailing in litigation and the potential cost of continuing the case. The county's decision indicated that the available evidence did not support a strong defense. Parallel to the civil resolution, Vaughn faced consequences within the systems governing law enforcement conduct and certification. The findings of the internal investigation and the broader record of his conduct contributed to those outcomes. He was convicted, lost his law enforcement certification, and his career ended. These consequences extended beyond what occurs in many similar cases, where officers may be reassigned or allowed to resign. In this instance, the process continued through certification review, resulting in permanent removal from law enforcement. The department also undertook changes in response to the issues identified during the investigation. These included reinforcing expectations around verifying dispatch information before escalating a call, strengthening oversight of body camera compliance, and increasing attention to patterns in officer conduct, rather than treating complaints as isolated events. The incident highlighted the role of early indicators. Repeated complaints with similar characteristics can signal underlying problems. When those signals are not addressed, the likelihood of a more serious incident increases. In this case, the convergence of a dispatch error, a failure to verify, and a pattern of escalation produce a situation with significant consequences. Mercer's actions remained consistent throughout the process. He maintained control during the encounter, documented the facts immediately afterward, and used formal channels to initiate review. His approach relied on preserving the sequence of events rather than interpreting them. The outcome demonstrates how documentation and process can determine whether an incident is examined or dismissed. Without a record, encounters of this type often remain unaddressed. With a record supported by verifiable data, they become subject to review and, when warranted, accountability. The central point remains unchanged.
Aside. This doesn't look right. Step aside. It is official military identification. You can verify it through the command liaison or event access. I'm not letting you through on this. Verify it. Where did you get this credential?
During this year's Fleet Week celebrations, a patrol officer assigned to gala security challenged a Black Navy admiral's credentials at the entrance to a VIP reception, ignored standard verification procedures, and escalated the encounter into a public confrontation. The incident was captured on body camera footage and later led to an internal affairs investigation and the officer's termination. The incident took place at the entrance to a Fleet Week VIP gala on the waterfront. It was a formal event with controlled access, attended by Navy leadership, city officials, sponsors, command staff, and media personnel. Security was layered, and patrol officers assigned to perimeter support were expected to follow the event's established access and verification plan. Officer Daniel Briggs was positioned at the reception entrance. He was a city patrol officer assigned to outer security support. His role was not to make final decisions on military credential validation. That function was already built into the event's security structure. Rear Admiral Edward Hale approached the entrance in formal dress uniform. His event badge was visible, and he had official military identification ready. He had already passed earlier stages of access connected to the broader Fleet Week schedule. Under the existing system, the remaining check should have taken only a few seconds. Briggs stopped him. At first, the exchange could have looked like a routine additional check. That impression did not last. Hale handed over his credentials, and Briggs examined them, then looked back at Hale, then returned to the credentials. The tone shifted quickly. Instead of using the normal verification process, Briggs began challenging the credentials themselves. He did not hand them to the event access staff working the lane. He did not consult the Navy liaison positioned inside the checkpoint. He did not request credential confirmation through dispatch or the established event chain. He treated the identification as suspicious on site. Hale remained calm. He identified himself and explained that the credentials were valid, official, and tied to the event roster. His response was measured and direct. He did not raise his voice or resist the process. He simply stated that the credentials could be verified through the proper channels. Briggs continued to escalate. The body camera showed him shift from screening the lane to physically blocking Hale's path. He began speaking over him and repeating that the identification did not look right. He stated that he would not allow Hale through. He treated Hale's calm explanation as further cause for suspicion. The setting made the confrontation more conspicuous. Inside the reception area were military personnel, civilian staff, photographers, and invited guests moving through a tightly managed event environment. This was not an unstructured street encounter. It was a formal military function with a defined chain of command and established procedures for access control. Briggs was operating within that framework, but was no longer following it. He did not treat other attendees the same way. Other guests were being processed through the checkpoint with brief visual review and standard professional tone. With Hale, Briggs slowed the process, added open suspicion, and introduced hostility. He was no longer checking access in the ordinary sense. He was challenging Hale's right to be there. Witnesses began to notice. A civilian event coordinator moved closer to the checkpoint. A Navy commander inside the reception area turned toward the exchange and continued watching. The scene shifted from routine screening to an obvious public incident. Hale again explained that the credential could be verified through proper channels. That should have resolved the issue. It was the clear next step. Briggs ignored it. Instead, he suggested that the identification might be forged. At that point, the problem was no longer confusion or caution. Briggs had chosen to treat his own suspicion as more important than the existing security system around him. Hale did not react emotionally. He did not create a scene. He continued to state that the credentials were valid and could be confirmed through the event's established chain. Briggs then warned that if Hale continued pressing the issue, he could be detained while his identity was sorted out. That was a significant escalation. Briggs was no longer delaying entry while seeking confirmation. He was threatening to detain a credentialed flag officer at a public military event without first using the verification methods already available to him. The threat was made in front of staff, military personnel, and other witnesses. Hale remained where he was, with his hands visible and his tone controlled. He did not argue like someone resisting lawful instructions. He spoke like someone who understood the process and could see that it was being ignored. Briggs, rather than using the next available step, treated the credential dispute itself as proof of guilt. In a layered security environment, that is not how credential concerns are supposed to be handled. The expected response is verification. Hale explained that he was on the Fleet Week guest list, that the identification was official military credentialing, and that the event had Navy coordination on site to confirm it immediately. His statements were clear and limited to the relevant facts. Briggs responded by challenging details of the credential format, the access badge, and Hale's presence at the VIP entrance, as though those questions could substitute for formal verification. He then began describing Hale as difficult and uncooperative. The footage did not support that characterization. Hale was standing still, answering questions and offering multiple ways to verify his identity. He was not interrupting, raising his hands, or changing his position in a way that could be described as threatening. A member of the event access team then intervened and stated that Hale was expected inside, and that credential verification could be handled through the command liaison station. Briggs dismissed her. That response made the problem more visible to everyone nearby. Once trained event staff attempted to resolve the issue and Briggs refused to use them, the confrontation was no longer about protecting the event. It had become a personal assertion of control. A Navy commander closer to the interior checkpoint turned fully towards the scene. Even without hearing every word from that position, it was clear that military personnel and event staff were now observing a confrontation that had moved well outside normal screening. Some likely recognized Hale immediately, others may not have. What was visible to everyone was that a senior black man in full dress uniform was being delayed, challenged, and spoken to aggressively after presenting official identification. Other attendees had been admitted with quick screening and standard tone. Hale was subjected to prolonged suspicion, public challenge, and a detention threat. The difference in treatment was visible on the footage and to the witnesses present. Hale continued to keep the exchange on procedure. He stated again that the identification could be run through the proper channels, that event command staff could confirm him, and that there was no need to escalate. Briggs replied that he did not care what the credential claimed until he was personally satisfied. That statement exposed the basic problem in the encounter. Briggs had placed his own personal suspicion above the event's established security structure, above the military coordination already on site, and above the ordinary verification process available to him. He had made himself the sole decision-maker in a situation where he was not authorized to act that way. Hale did not attempt to flatter him or calm him through personal deference. He remained formal and repeated that Briggs was refusing to use the proper channels. Briggs responded by increasing the pressure and again warning that if Hale did not step aside and cooperate, he would be detained until his identity was sorted out. That changed the encounter from an improper screening delay into a direct threat of unlawful escalation. By that point, the event staff and military personnel around them reacted more openly. The civilian coordinator objected and indicated that the situation had already gone too far. A second staff member moved away quickly, likely to alert someone higher in the event chain. The Navy commander near the interior lane also moved closer. Briggs did not back down. He appeared more rigid as the tension increased. Hale continued to deny him any basis for a claim of disorderly conduct or officer safety risk. He did not step toward Briggs. He did not create any physical conflict. He continued to point to the available verification process. Briggs began issuing instructions in a clipped and performative tone, telling Hale to step back, wait, stop talking, and let him handle the matter. The tone was no longer that of neutral screening. It was an attempt to reclaim visible control in front of an audience. It did not work. By then, too many people had already seen the same facts. Event staff knew Briggs had refused verification. Military personnel knew he was outside his role. Witnesses had seen that Hale remained calm and compliant throughout. What started as a credential dispute had become a public power struggle, and Briggs was losing the support of the scene around him. One Navy officer who had moved close enough to see the credential attempted to tell Briggs directly that the matter could be resolved immediately through command confirmation. Briggs cut him off as well. At that point, he had ignored the credential holder, the event staff, and nearby military personnel, all while refusing to use the verification process in place for that exact environment. Hale then shifted into more formal reporting language. He stated that Briggs was refusing standard verification, creating a public disruption, and threatening unlawful detention within a controlled federal military event setting. The statement was precise and clearly intended for the camera, for the witnesses, and for later review. Briggs stepped closer without making physical contact, but enough to add pressure to the encounter. Hale did not move. Briggs still had the visible authority of a local patrol officer assigned to the perimeter. Hale, however, had rank, discipline, multiple witnesses, and the documented facts of the exchange. Briggs appeared to believe that tone and posture would outweigh structure and procedure. The scene showed otherwise. Lieutenant Sarah Kim then entered from the side access corridor with the event operations lead behind her. It was immediately clear that she understood both the seriousness of the situation and the number of witnesses already present. Briggs began speaking before she reached them, describing what he called a suspicious credential issue and characterizing Hale as difficult. He was attempting to shape her initial understanding of the incident before she reviewed it herself. Kim did not accept that framing. She looked first at Hale, then at the credential, then at Briggs. She asked for the identification. Hale handed it over. Kim examined it briefly, then checked the event badge. The operations lead leaned in and confirmed that Hale was on the access roster. The issue Briggs had spent several minutes escalating was resolved almost immediately by doing what should have been done at the beginning. Even then, Briggs did not stop. He insisted that he still had concerns and that he had the right to hold the line until he was personally satisfied. Kim asked whether he had contacted the Navy liaison. He had not. She asked whether he had run the event roster. He had not. She asked whether he had requested secondary verification through the command table nearby. He had not. She also asked whether Hale had threatened him, resisted him, or done anything that justified a detention threat. The footage provided no support for that. Briggs replied that Hale had been uncooperative. That claim did not hold. The body camera was running, and numerous witnesses had observed the full sequence. The event coordinator was present. Navy personnel were present. Hale then addressed Kim directly and explained what had occurred in order. He stated that he had presented valid military identification, offered verification through established channels, and had instead been accused of using forged credentials and threatened with detention. His account was concise and factual. Kim then turned back to Briggs. At that point, it was clear that he no longer controlled the scene. His stance changed, and his voice dropped. He attempted to recast his conduct as thoroughness, arguing that the event was high profile and that he was trying to avoid a mistake. The problem was that he had already made several. Kim told Briggs that he was finished handling the checkpoint and directed another officer to assume perimeter support. She returned Hale's credentials with the professionalism Briggs had failed to show. Hale then stated that he wanted the matter formally documented. He made clear that the issue was not simple discourtesy. It involved the refusal to recognize official military credentials, the bypassing of standard verification procedures, the public nature of the humiliation, and the explicit threat of detention after lawful identification had already been presented. That statement changed the matter from an operational dispute to a formal conduct issue with liability implications. The event operations lead confirmed that multiple staff members had witnessed the incident. Navy personnel did the same. Another staff member noted that fixed venue security cameras had also captured part of the exchange at the entrance lane. Briggs attempted to reinsert himself by saying that his concerns should still be respected. By then, the claim carried little weight. Every available corrective step had come from outside him, and he had rejected each one until supervisory authority overrode him. Before entering the gala, Hale made one final point to Kim. He stated that security and humiliation were not the same thing, and that Briggs had confused the two in front of an entire military and civilian audience. Kim acknowledged the report and stated that the matter would be referred immediately. She then called for an internal affairs duty investigator that same night. Briggs was directed to step off assignment pending review at the venue and in uniform, in view of the other officers, who had by then understood the seriousness of what had happened. Hale then resumed his evening after being forced to do what no senior officer at that event should have had to do: prove to a patrol officer that his official military credentials were real. Internal Affairs moved immediately. Lieutenant Robert Ellis from IA was notified that night. Body camera preservation was ordered, and the department began collecting the relevant evidence. Ellis reviewed Briggs' body camera footage, the entrance security camera feed, and statements from Lieutenant Kim, the event operations lead, Navy personnel, and the civilian access staff who had witnessed the encounter. He also obtained the event security plan. That document showed that patrol support officers were not authorized to override credential validation without first using the established verification chain. The footage did not support Briggs's account. It showed Hale presenting valid identification early, remaining calm throughout, and offering verification routes Briggs never used. It showed event staff trying to resolve the matter. It showed Briggs escalate anyway. Most damaging, it showed the detention threat occur only after multiple opportunities for proper verification had already been presented and ignored. Internal Affairs also reviewed comparison points from the checkpoint flow. Other guests had been processed with ordinary screening and professional tone. Hale had been subjected to additional suspicion, challenge, and hostility. The same entrance in the same event had produced markedly different treatment. Kim's formal statement confirmed that Briggs had failed to use the event's verification system, had failed to involve the proper military liaison, and had continued pressing the issue even after valid credentials had been visually confirmed. She also stated that no conduct by Hale justified a detention threat. The event operations lead and Navy personnel gave statements consistent with hers. Briggs attempted to defend himself during his interview. He said he had been thorough. The footage showed that he had been combative. He said Hale had been difficult. The footage showed that Hale had remained measured. He said he had concerns about forgery. When asked what specific indicators supported that concern and what verification steps he had taken before escalating, he could not identify any document irregularity or procedural basis. What remained was suspicion, insistence, and escalation without support. Ellis then widened the review to Briggs's prior conduct history. The result did not help him. There were prior citizen complaints involving aggressive tone, escalation during routine encounters, and resistance to correction from supervisors. None of those incidents had previously ended his career, but they made this case appear less isolated and more consistent with an existing pattern. By the next morning, Briggs had been placed on administrative leave. The department issued a brief statement confirming that an incident involving credential verification at a Fleet Week event was under review, and that the department was cooperating with military leadership. The statement was limited and cautious. It did not slow the spread of the story. Information about the incident had already circulated through Fleet Week personnel, city officials, and the department itself. Local reporters soon began asking why a black Navy admiral in dress uniform had been challenged, accused, and threatened by a patrol officer after presenting official identification at a formal military reception. Navy leadership did not allow the matter to remain informal. Hale filed a formal report documenting the refusal to recognize military credentials, the bypassing of verification channels, the public nature of the confrontation, and the detention threat. The report carried significance not only as a personal complaint, but also as a matter affecting interagency trust during a public military event. Internal Affairs completed its review unusually quickly. Because the evidence was extensive, the witness accounts were consistent, and the body camera footage was clear. The final findings concluded that Briggs had violated event security protocol, failed to follow credential verification procedures, engaged in conduct unbecoming, made an unjustified detention threat, and escalated a routine access check into a public confrontation without lawful or operational basis. The findings also stated that his conduct exposed the department to reputational and legal risk and damaged its working relationship with Navy Command during Fleet Week operations. The final disciplinary decision followed earlier that week. Officer Daniel Briggs was terminated. The department then issued a public apology to Rear Admiral Edward Hale, the United States Navy, and Fleet Week organizers. It also announced policy updates for joint operations involving military events, including mandatory retraining on federal credential recognition, verification hierarchy, and escalation limits for outer perimeter patrol officers. The case continued to have internal effects after the firing. Briggs's body camera footage was used within the department as a training example. Supervisors used it to demonstrate how quickly a manageable credential concern can become a career-ending conduct matter when an officer stops verifying facts and begins asserting personal authority beyond procedure. Hale did not pursue media attention. He completed his Fleet Week obligations, filed his report, and allowed the formal record to speak for itself. His conduct throughout the incident and afterward remained restrained, factual, and procedural.